Well, good morning or late morning, everyone. My name is Margaret Prescod, and along with Phoebe Jones, who's based in Philadelphia, Phoebe will be helping me to co-facilitate, co-chair this session, which is entitled "The Prisoner's Struggle, Point of Reference for Our Movement and Our Communities." We have such an amazing panel. I'm so very honored to be chairing a session with these amazing women and one man who will be presenting, and we'll introduce each of them as we go along. And I'll tell you a little bit about the reason for our title, which we say here, that the California Prisoners' Hunger and Work Strike focus on ending solitary confinement with support spearheaded by the families, mainly women. It brought all races together and strengthened the movement against prison, jail, detention, expansion, and the criminalization of migration, survival, and resistance. And for those of us, I wear several hats, I suppose. One is as a journalist with Pacifica Radio, hosting a drive time show in Los Angeles. It's on in the mornings, and in Washington, D.C., and in New York City, it's on in the afternoons. Public affairs, we do political stuff, and I must say several of these people I've interviewed on the show. But I came to Pacifica and journalism by way of activism, and I am a co-founder, one of the founding members of Women of Color in the Global Women's Strike, which is a global women's network, and also of the Every Mother is a Working Mother network, and have over the years done a lot of community work, trained in the welfare rights, the civil rights, and the Black movements, and an immigrant myself from the Caribbean, from Barbados, which is where I was born and raised, as we say in Barbados. I'm a village girl, not from the city, so it was a bit of a shock. My family immigrating from a small village in an island that's 14 by 21 in size to New York City, Brooklyn. What a shock. Okay? And it wasn't only the weather or the food either. With our women's network, we do lots of different things, and I do like to use the example of, it's like our campaigning, as we call it, it's like doing housework. You know, everybody here who's done it, you know, you can't do one thing at a time. You know, they don't understand multitasking. Well, as a movement, we've had to multitask. And when the California Prisoner Hunger Strike happened, it was the third. And each time we knew how important it was. When the Georgia strike happened, the statewide strike, we understood how important that was as well, because the level of leadership coming from inside prison walls is such an inspiration to all of us. We have so much to learn from them. And Dolores, those of you where's Dolores Canales? Dolores Canales, who's here, one of the spokeswomen for the hunger strikers, you know, on the outside. I mean, she had me in tears, so I don't know about you, but she started speaking, and it wasn't only what she said, which was so powerful, but in listening to Dolores, you knew you were hearing the voice of the people. You were hearing the voice of a movement, and of a new civil rights movement that's coming up. So I just wanted to thank you, Dolores, and honor, you know, your work and your inspiration, Dolores Canales. But when 30,000 strong prisoners went out on a hunger strike, which is how it started, it's unbelievable, because all of us could think of, when has that happened on the outside? And when the leadership of the prisoners, I mean, men in solitary confinement in one of the most repressive prisons in this country, who were Black, who were brown, who were Native American, who were white, came together to call and bill for this hunger strike and issue the most remarkable statement. If you haven't read all of their statements have been remarkable, but they said, we are going out on hunger strike not only for ourselves and our conditions here, but for prisoners everywhere and for oppressed people everywhere. I mean, it just lifts your spirit. And furthermore, when they said is that we have not only called for, but a cessation of hostilities among the races. What a thing! So we felt whatever it was we were doing, and we do work hard, we could just not allow this moment to move forward and to continue business as usual. Business cannot continue as usual after the California prisoners' hunger strike.
Right.
It has got to be a point of reference for everything else that we're doing, whatever work that we are involved in. A similar thing for the strike, for the work of the immigrants' rights movement that is coming up. And I was so encouraged, Dolores, when I heard the brother in South Central LA say to you, what, black and brown people coming together, it'll never happen.
Yeah,
well,
right.
it is happening, people, and a force that will be reckoned with. So that's one of the reasons for this title of the prisoner's struggle, point of reference for our movement in our communities. And so on that note, we have invited people on the panel who not only have loved ones inside in solitary confinement, but also Isabel Garcia. I'm so honored to have her here with working based right here in Tucson on the front lines of the migrants and immigrants' rights struggle, to Eric Gjertsen from Payday Men's Network and the incredible work that they're doing with refuseniks around the world and whistleblowers around the world. And so we know that it's all one piece. So I'm going to share the introductions of our panelists, and I'd like to get straight to them. And we're going to start out with California Families Against Solitary Confinement. And Daletha Hayden, another inspiration of mine, the mother of 2 sons in prison, 1 in solitary confinement, and a member of California Families to Abolish Solitary Confinement. Daletha.
Thank you. The first thing that I would like to say is a message from my son. When I let him know that I was going to be attending this, he said, "Mom, please be sure and tell everyone how much this means to us to have so many people and so many organizations come together in support." And like Dolores had said before, all of us, these organizations really have a huge debt to owe to the hunger strikers, because they gave these organizations a platform to be heard, where so many of them had not really been heard by the general public until they stepped up and were literally putting their lives on the line. And another young man who actually did lose his life during the hunger strike. So my son would like to thank all of you.
Here, here.
Tell him we thank him too, please.
I will definitely, because he will get the report next Sunday. Literally, I came to find out about organizations and what to do for my son out of sheer desperation. He had told me about a magazine, Prison Focus, and I immediately got on the computer, looked up Prison Focus, and found out they were having an event in Oakland. I live in Southern California. I literally jumped in my car and drove up because they were going to have a meeting the next day. And from that point, I found out about the hunger strike in 2011 that was coming up, and other things that were being done that I was not aware of. In fact, I was feeling like an island. I was feeling like I was very alone and had no one to turn to. And I know that that's the way that many family members feel. When I went to attended the first hunger strike rally in Sacramento is where I met Dolores Canales, the co-founder of California Families to Abolish Solitary Confinement, and so many other wonderful people that were standing for this cause, and able to support them. Another thing that my son wanted to dispel is that they try and say that these guys are the worst of the worst and they're following, you know, the gang leaders. My son participated in the hunger strike. He participated for 4 weeks, And he wanted to make sure that everybody knew that the only reason he participated in the hunger strike was because of the abuses of the system, not because some gang leader, alleged gang leader, was telling him he had to participate. We always make our jokes about that. It's like, okay, since they're so well connected, where's my car? Where's all the benefits of being connected, you know, for all of us families, when California Families Against Solitary Confinement is doing fundraisers to help other families get up to Pelican Bay to see their loved ones that they may not have seen for over 10 years. So those are the kinds of things that we're talking about organizations being able to support and do. And as a result of that, we are letting more and more people know what's going on, taking away that isolation that the family members feel by getting them more involved. So my focus right now is kind of like how imprisonment and the hunger strike and these various aspects affects the family. It's devastating. It is devastating. You struggle to be able to see your loved ones. You're humiliated by those that you come in contact with before you get to visit them. So you're a nervous wreck coming in. Am I dressed right? Getting there on time. How is anyone going to treat you? And although I've been very fortunate not to be targeted, I'm just as stressed because I'm listening to them and how they're treating other people. And I'm like, okay, what are they going to do to me? So it's extremely stressful just trying to go and visit your loved ones and be there and stay connected with them. In solitary confinement, we literally get 1 hour visit behind glass. I've not been able to touch, hug, or kiss my son in 5 years now. Oh. And I feel like that's nothing when I hear that others have been in solitary confinement for 20, 30, and 40 years. When a man can come out after 41 years and have only 4 or 5 days left to live, it hurts my heart because I don't know how long my son is going to have in solitary confinement. I am prayerful that because of all the efforts that we are making, that it's going to be a lot shorter, that he won't even see a decade in there. But it is extremely, extremely difficult when you know that other people have suffered for that long. And many that have gotten out that were wrongfully accused spent time in solitary confinement. And my son and Dolores' son also are wrongful convictions, but that's another aspect. But as you all know, people are released every week, and they've spent 17, 20-some years for something they didn't do because the officer decided after he retired that he would come back and say, oh, I didn't really tell the truth about that. But that's another aspect of the sufferings that families go through. I've also found that once we get through the visiting and can see our family members, another area, even with our small victories, like as a result of the 2011 hunger strike, some small things have been given back, like education. But so in solitary confinement now they can take college courses. My son was taking them before when he was in general population, and then when he went into solitary confinement he wasn't able to do it. Well, as a result of the hunger strike, they are able to do that now. A lot of family members don't realize, and it is not the easiest thing to do because literally just getting their books in there to them, you get the books there and it goes through 4 different departments to get the book to them, their textbooks. A lot of family members would be extremely weary to get online if they knew how much time I spent online trying to get books, and then when the books get to the facility, making sure I'm in touch with every department head and getting them to him, and it's crazy. Even with that, my son, he encourages other inmates to further their education. but they were discouraged at the very beginning because they're like going, oh, this is not going to work. So my son was kind of the test model. He got in there, got the books in there, he did his first class. Well, then he saved his books. He told the next guy, you take these classes, I'll just give you my books. And that's kind of the premise that we've been working on. But we need to just keep doing what we're doing, sticking together quickly. My son has said, as many of us as there are out here, we could form our own union, and the guys are willing to take less canteen, tell their family members, Mom, Dad, send money to the organizations that are supporting us. You know, instead of me getting $20 in canteen this month, give me 10 and put 10 out. So they're willing to sacrifice themselves. You know, I forgot the letter that my son wrote to me, or I could kind of read out the, you know, what he actually, the plan was. But they are willing to further sacrifice even from their own comfort, small comforts that they can get in there to further what we're doing out here. And thank you for being listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Daletha. We will have some time for discussion. Next, I would like to welcome Mary Sutton. She is a member of Critical Resistance, also of Californians United for Responsible Budget, which is a statewide alliance in California fighting for prisoners' rights and jail reforms. They're fighting expansions of prisons and jails. She's also active with No More Jails in Los Angeles, including fighting for the building, against the building of a new women's jail that they're calling a women's village. Mary Sutton.
Well, thank you. I'm really honored to be here, especially with mothers of the folks inside solitary confinement. I drove out with Daletha. We've become fast friends, I do believe. You know, the solitary confinement inside of California's prisons is just symbolic of the overall horrific prison industrial complex and mass incarceration in this country. I just do a quick overview. You know, we have more people in prison than any other country in the world. We have 25% of the world's prison population and 5% of the world's population. For every 709 people, every 100,000 people, we put 709 people in prison or jail. Other civilized countries are putting 65, 50 people. We incarcerate more people than Rwanda, Iraq, Iran, you know, all the bad guys. So we are the enemy of the world, right? California has the largest prison population in the country. Sometimes we are competing with Texas. In 1980, we had 20,000 people in California state prisons. In 2007, we had 180,000 people in California state prisons. So that these years, between 1980 and 2005, across the country, as the safety social net was slashed and burned, California started investing in prisons. We built 22 state prisons in that time, 1 university and a couple community colleges. And then we filled those prisons, double their capacity. So to such a degree that a lawsuit, finally after 20 years, the Plata-Coleman case, lawsuit confronting overcrowding and health conditions, there was 1 person dying inside the California state prisons every week. And so a federal district court in California deemed that indeed California had to reduce its prison population to relieve overcrowding, to improve health conditions. And California appealed that, and then it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has upheld that. So still, California is resisting reducing their prison population. Schwarzenegger's answer to that was to build more prisons. Well, we know if we build them, we fill them, and we fill them double their capacity. So this is not the answer. There's lots and lots of ways, there's lots of studies, well-founded strategies to reduce incarceration, reduce recidivism, and take dollars and put it in the communities and build up the social safety net again, and all the things that will take care of our communities. As a member of Critical Resistance, and I'm an abolitionist, so we believe that if we take care from day one, and we're taking care in our communities and building what we need that there's less and less reason, I mean, there's no reason to lock people up behind cages, but there's less and less reason to restrain anybody for poor behavior. And if someone cannot be, everyone needs to be treated humanely. Putting people in cages only makes the problem worse. We know that for a fact. So now Jerry Brown, to reduce overcrowding, his answer is realignment. So what they've done is taken the non-serious, non-violent, non-sex offenders, and they're going to now do their time in county jails instead of prison. Now, this bulk of people is like who have been caught up in these new laws. So, the laws that changed over that same period of time went indeterminate to determinate sentencing, mandatory sentencing law, conspiracy and association charges, which have always been there, but they're using them more and more. This is how they're, lining up the gang injunctions. It's one of the reasons so many women now are the fastest growing part of the prison population in this country, and certainly in California, and now in the county jails because of realignment. The county jails, women in county jails are, it's just packed. The level of mental health cases in the county jails is extreme. Los Angeles is now, because of realignment, the California state is putting out more money to build more prisons and more money to build county jails still. But every county now is also getting realignment money, and these are dollars, AB 109 dollars. I don't want to get too technical, but the fact is that the counties have a choice to use these dollars, and in LA County, they're getting $250 million in year 2 of realignment, and almost $350 million projected for year 3. And they're giving them the bulk of it, 80 to 90%, to the sheriff's department and the probation department. But they have a choice to put that money into the community, and there's some counties that are doing, up in Alameda County, Santa Cruz, these counties are doing some of the right things and putting some of that money into building back the social safety net. So LA County is proposing to build a multi-billion-dollar jail project, including a women's village. They have the nerve, they're calling it a village, for 1,156 new cages for women. And the sheriff brags that the sheriff, the county jail has been, under investigation for the severe violence and brutality. And Sheriff Baca continues to brag that he can serve people with mental health issues, and he can serve these women, and he can give these women what they need better than anyone else on the outside. So we're fighting this multi-billion-dollar project in LA, and LA County is trying to hang on to all these dollars and trying to extend and expand the county jail system as much as they can. We just had a victory. Through realignment, the state lost a lot of its prisoners, right? And a lot of them fought fires for the state. Now LA County is sending prisoners to fight the fires. But they were also going to do a private contract in the city of Taft for local county prisoners to go all the way 2 hours north, back into a private facility that was emptied because of realignment. And we just won a great victory. We've been down at the Board of Supervisors, and this is what it takes. Down at the Board of Supervisors, down at the Board of Supervisors. It's constant, shaming them and putting pressure on them and making people understand what is going on. And we finally had a victory. They turned around their vote to expand the county system up in Taft by 512 people. So that was a victory, but a small victory, because my guess is it'll come back to us, and they will they'll use that to say, well, then we need to build our new jail. And they're proposing a mental health tower, to take care of people with mental health issues inside of county jail. So it's an immense, overwhelming struggle, and we need the bodies and people there. I do have a petition. If you haven't signed this yet over the weekend, please sign it. It's for California, but anybody can sign it, and we will stay in touch with you.
By way of a short introduction of myself, I'm Phoebe Jones, and I work with the Global Women's Strike in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia, as probably most people know, is where it all happened with Mumia Abu-Jamal, who, as we said earlier, has just come off of death row as a result of the movement. But he was convicted of killing a cop. He was a former Black Panther, and it was a retaliation for it, and the movement has kept him alive all these years. We've been very involved in supporting Mumia. I mean, and partly because both Mumia and Russell Maroon Shoatz, Theresa's father, who also is from Philadelphia, both of them have really begun with the leadership of women and really drawn that out in their work. And it was Mumia who told us that the majority of people in the Black Panther Party were women, and that, you know, he was really trained by the mothers and others in the movement, and he recognized that, and Russell has the same, you know, recognition that the direction has come from women. Mumia has given quotes every year for our Global Women's Strike event on March 8th. We also published books. Selma James, who is coordinator of the Global Women's Strike, has met with Mumia a number of times, and they, you know, concocted doing a book called Jailhouse Lawyers to bring out the leadership of the the prisoners who have become lawyers. They're in the back, and, you know, to bring out how, you know, how disastrous the lawyers are outside compared to the ones inside who are fighting, you know, really with everything they've got to get out, and how much work it is to get the lawyers to do anything for you. So even if you got a lawyer, it's a lot of work for all of them to do it. And one other point is that the other way we come across in the prisons too is that in the foster care, we deal a lot with women who've lost their kids to foster care system, and it's because a lot of times they've been in prison and they can't get their kids back who've been adopted. So with that, I'd like to introduce and welcome Rachel West. And Rachel is the spokeswoman for the U.S. Prostitutes Collective, which campaigns for the decriminalization of prostitution, for safety and protection and resources, so no one is forced into prostitution through poverty. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. We're also part of the anti-prison movement. You know, we find that so many women go to prison for prostitution-related offences. I mean, mainly Black and immigrant women, you know, fill up the prisons, being arrested for prostitution and then going to prison. And we know that if women had money and didn't have to be illegal to support ourselves and our families, there'd be a lot less women in prison. And, you know, prostitution really is a survival strategy for women to be able to survive in these, you know, terrible economic times when there's no money, and a way to support and even keep our kids alive, let's face it. You know, the work that we do is we do casework and we do campaigning work. We do casework because women, you know, sex workers are up against criminalization and all the repercussions of criminalization, having our children taken away, terrible violence, imprisonment, arrests, deportation if you're a sex worker. And so we take up individual cases of women at the same time while we're campaigning for decriminalization and resources for women. And, you know, doing these cases really informs our campaigning work. It's crucial for our campaigning work because we find out what we need to campaign on doing these cases. And we've recently been really involved in a case of a young woman who came to us because she had been brutally beaten and raped in her home. And then she went and applied for compensation for rape and was turned down. And we found out through her that there is a regulation, very little known in California, called the Involvement in the Qualifying Crime of Prostitution, which says that if you're a sex worker, you are not entitled to get compensation for rape. Now, we were shocked, and, you know, people are shocked when they hear about this, because it's like, what? Did the women ask for it? You know, we thought those days were over where they blamed victims for the rape and said, you were involved, therefore you shouldn't be compensated. I mean, what is that? You know, aren't those days gone? And then in the process of organizing, we also found out that ex-prisoners on felony probation or parole are also excluded. There's another regulation that we've taken up and we're also fighting, that you know, you get out of prison, you're on probation, you are not entitled to compensation for rape. I mean, why is that? You know, it's totally outrageous. You can't get any money, you can't get any help, you can't get your locks changed. You know, it's useful to be able to get that money. If you don't have any money, You need to move. I mean, you need some help, you know, counseling, you need housing, medical bills paid. I mean, there is, you know, that money you need, and you're not entitled to it. So we decided, you know, as we were helping this woman with her case, that we would take up working to get these regulations scrapped, removed from the California Compensation Program. And we initiated a campaign and started going up to hearings. They were actually having hearings up in Sacramento, which is the state capital, because they were keeping the compensation as is, but they were adding an allowance for victims of trafficking. They should be, you know, who are in prostitution, they should be able to get the compensation, but leave the exclusion for other sex workers. And we were outraged and went up, and a whole bunch of us, we organized other women to go up, and we spoke in these hearings to the, you know, these state officers of these bureaucrats. They heard from rape victims, and they heard from sex workers what it's like to be denied, what it's like to be raped, and not be able to get protection from the police. And we had, you know, amazing testimonies. We've actually brought information in the back that you can read of what the women said. And they sat and they were kind of stunned. You know, and we actually had, part of the work that we do is try to find people inside, you know, in the power structures that can help us. And there's a sympathetic person in the power structure that thinks this regulation should be got rid of. So that's been really helpful. We're working on building the relationship with him. And what happened in the process of testifying and really bringing our stories to the state capitol was that we went to the board of the compensation program, and they said they will look into the regulation, into the prostitution regulation, and they are now looking into it, and they're going to report back on December the 12th with a proposal, and we're hoping they're going to get it scrapped. So, you know, that's, and we do have a action alert that I hope you'll all take. It's at the back. Please sign it. There's a number to call the board members on the compensation board, and, you know, from around the country. It's great that they've heard from you that we want this regulation scrapped. There's a model letter on the back that you can send into the, tells you where to send it in, so please send it in. And finally, I just wanted to bring your attention to an article that I hope you'll all read. It's by Selma James, and I'll just give you the title and then I'm finished because my time is up. But you can Google it, and it's Sex Workers Need Support, but Not from the Hands of My Whore Brigade. And it's a story of a recent proposal in France to criminalize men, clients of prostitutes. We're against that, and this article, if you read it, will give all the reasons. Selma explains the reasons why we're against criminalizing men. And it's, you know, there's more about the prostitute strike. Prostitutes went on strike in France in 1975. And if I could just read the end of what she says in her article, because some men actually came forward, because the feminists, you know, don't support sex workers, but some men actually came forward and said, "Hands off my whores," in support of the sex workers, supposedly in support of "Hands off my whores." And so the French women, in response, this is, you know, just recently this happened, French sex workers, Selma says, must have the last word. Morgane Merteuil, General Secretary of STRAS, which is the Syndicat du Travail Sexuel, the union of sex work, which campaigns for decriminalization, told the men claiming to defend them, "We are nobody's whores, especially not yours. If we fight for our rights, it is largely to have more power against you, so we can dictate our terms."
All righty, thank you, Rachel.
To the point.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
are there the action alert? Are there enough of the action
Yeah,
alert
lots of
that it could be passed around, please? Thank you.
He wanted the name of the article.
The name of the article.
Sex workers need support.
Sex workers need support, but not from the hands of my whores.
Right, and you could get that after as well. I would now like, and I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Theresa Shoatz. She's a longtime community activist. She is a member of the Human Rights Campaign Coalition. She's concerned with issues in her community and has taken in 11 foster children into her home. Just amazing, amazing work. She's the daughter of Russell Maroon Shoatz, who is in solitary confinement, has been in solitary confinement for about more than 20 years, more than 2 decades. He has spent 40 years in prison, and he just turned 70 years old. Theresa.
Thank you all for coming out. You know, with my dad being 70 years of age, and it's actually almost 30 years trapped in a cell, trapped within his self. I have been going in the prison system for 40 years. I'm 49. I started at the age of 9. So there's so much that I could tell you, and there's just not enough time. But what happens is that when I first started going into the prison system, it was about rehabilitation. There were all kind of programs to send prisoners out back into the world with skills or with education. They had a road that they could follow. And at that time, back in the 70s and 80s, there weren't many people returning to prison. And it wasn't considered big business as it is today. I always like to ask people when I speak is, do you feel safer? Because every time your politicians or there's a new election, I think next week the election for judges is coming up in Pennsylvania. And although I'm not big on this election process, judges make a big difference. So we do have to look into who's running as a judge and get there and press them before they even hit the bench. So what happened with my dad is that my dad's a Black Panther who initially started the Unity Council in Philadelphia because in the Black communities, neighbors, folks in his community, his neighbors were begging for Panthers assistance or the Black Unity. They would be trampled upon by the Philadelphia Police Department. We had this infamous mayor, Frank Rizzo, and he would just run rampant in the Black community. And he was heard saying one time, he kicked down a family member's door and said, "Oh, wrong nigger," and turned around and started kicking in other doors. And at that point, a 16-year-old kid was gunned down in his kitchen right in front of his mother. And of course you couldn't demand anything from the police officers in response to this killing. So the people in the community demanded that the Panthers stand up and fight now, because we know the Panthers began with food programs. With the first sickle cell tests, they tested thousands of Blacks where our government wouldn't do it. And if you look at some of these programs that will begin, like they say the Kennedys are responsible for the free breakfast program. Well, the Panthers did that well before, and they started this in the public school system and the sickle cell program. Now, the government took a lot from those type of medical programs where we couldn't call 911 for help. North Carolina was one of the first the Black Panthers that had their own ambulance service. So when we look at, just don't look at the Panthers as these people in the Black community were wearing all black and they were carrying guns. At a point, they went out and had to defend themselves, that they were threatened and being forced upon by police throughout the country. So I can remember going into the prisons as young as 9 years old, and I thought it was such a wonderful place to go. It was well kept, it was manicured lawns, and the floors were shiny. Until one day a guard did something, and I was very upset. And I said, you know, when I go to the next visit, I'll deal with him The next visit. And as soon as the next visit, I didn't tell my dad or anyone, I kicked him straight square in the nuts. And I said, what are you doing? And I got, 2 guards came and carried me from under my arm and said, you're not going to see your dad no more. I said, don't mess with, my dad. Don't mess with my dad. And they carried me out, set me, and they said, you're not going to see your dad today. Well, my dad, they said, was trying to get that visit because I wasn't there. And he said, but she's going to be a fighter. But we didn't know I would have to fight this long. And the other thing is, now, with so many kids who have loved ones in prison, think about if a kid is that passionate like I was about my daddy, realizing this isn't no nice place that he's in, from hearing what those guards were doing, and the kid take out their anger on the guard, which so many kids are angry now, so they retaliating against each other, killing each other, and most of our little babies expect to go to prison. Or you can go in a kindergarten class now. Now, how many of you have someone in prison? Mostly all the hands will go up. But at my time, I told you prison was a little different. Now, if a kid took out their anger just in passion for their loved one, they will go to a juvenile detention center. Times are changed. So what happens with solitary confinement is that my dad escaped twice. He liberated himself twice, and it was incredible. That's when I knew Superman, Spider-Man was not my hero. I was looking at the television. He was on there was a 28-day manhunt. And he had lived off the land, and it was on news every day, and people would come to our home because we were cheering him on through the television. But when he was finally captured, because he could not get out of that area, he had turtle eggs in his pocket. And we have to get to that point, and I'm not saying because we're going to help someone escape, that we're going to have to learn now. This country is going down. To live off of the land and not be so dependent upon, and especially not the way the food is going with Monsanto and all of those regulators over our food, but we're going to have to get ready to survive. So if we know how to survive, we can help those prisoners from behind bars and solitary confinement, like our heroes, the California strikers, who did a wonderful, it was dynamic. I wanted to be in California every day. Of course, I'm in Philadelphia. So what happened was that solitary confinement was not for people like my dad who escaped. Because you get 7 years tacked onto you. What he became was a leader. And not only on the outside, but on the inside. And prisoners were cheering him on. And when the prison got wind of that, and he came back teaching educational classes, how to survive on the land and political education. He became the first black president of the only prison-approved lifer program. And it was all white. The president was white. He stepped down and let my daddy be the first black. And the warden came in and said, take it back. This vote, he will not be the first black. And they said, we want him. Over 100 prisoners would come, even some guards would sit in and listen to his educational program. And when they didn't take back the vote, they all went on a hunger strike. And then they shipped my daddy out of there. He's been in solitary ever since. Ever since. So with that, those kind of uprisings, here we have white prisoners come together, like the black and the brown, the poor whites now. When they see something like that, it has to be squashed. And that's why it hasn't been any uprising since Attica. Think about it. When the prisoners demanded better treatment, they are going to squash these voices with solitary confinement. If you're a profound jailhouse lawyer helping other prisoners, you're going to solitary confinement. If you protest against any injustice, there's medical injustice there, and there's all kind of other injustice. I'm with the Human Rights Coalition Group, HRC, and two of my comrades are here, Patricia Vickers and Karen Ali. HRC is 10 years old now, stand up, and she's been with HRC for the 10 years. And said Karen Ali's husband is been sentenced to life. Well, her son's sentenced to life as a juvenile, 17 years old, and he's in his 40s. How old is he now? 42 at 17. That's an injustice in itself. HRC was started from behind bars by my dad. We have what I call reporters behind bars, and there are professors. Whatever they say do, that's what I do, because they're on the inside and they know better than any of us. And so what we did was we started using them as our reporters, and we created a book, The Movement, her and her son, he's the editor, and the Justice Department right now. I attended the first congressional hearing on solitary confinement. It was so well attended, the biggest last year, and they opened up additional doors, but the Federal Justice Department came to me and said, we've been watching your magazine, the HRC Movement. If you go online, you can read back issues. They said, we're going to prosecute 8 guards who've been raping prisoners at Pittsburgh, and we got that information from your website. Because we list every allegation of abuse. Even though these men are in solitary confinement, they're putting their life on the line. When you hear about these mothers in California, when you hear about a prisoner going on strike, and they coming together to merge together, you must support them. Because they are putting their lives on the line the same way these prisoners had. And I will also tell you, we have Najee here for Jericho today in the room. You have to support our political prisoners, because we are destined to be political prisoners.
That's right.
So, and then we have a petition online on the HRC website. So with that, I'm going to stop, because I could, listen, this has been 40 years going into prison, so I've seen it all. But I thank you for coming. If you have any questions, I'm here.
Thank you, Theresa. Now I'd like to introduce and welcome Eric Gjertsen. Eric is with Payday Men's Network and working with military refusers and their families internationally, including most recently in support of Chelsea Manning. Eric also helps care for his partner's mother outside of Philadelphia. Eric.
Well, thank you, and I feel very honored to be part of this amazing panel, and learned so much already. I'm here, I wanted to say a few words about who Payday is. First, and then I wanted to speak about Chelsea Manning and our work with, in support of her.
Louder, please.
Yes. We are a network of men who work with the Global Women's Strike. We're waged and unwaged. There's a subsistence farmer, Dean, who's here in the background.
Subsistence farmer.
Also, we have a former social worker, a trade unionist, Sam's here, former trade unionist in the back. A family caregiver, a gay man, a high school counselor, and we also work with the Queer Strike, which is a network of lesbian and bisexual women within the Global Women's Strike. Part of our work is really to get men to do politics and talk about politics based on their own experience. And that's really kind of a lot of our struggle, because although it's something that women do all the time, for men it's much more difficult for whatever reason. We really want to do a new kind of politics, and in which our demands don't conflict, our demands that we bring out aren't conflicting with women's and children's demands, and in fact enhance them. And we have many initiatives, and as Phoebe mentioned, we work with refuseniks, military refusers, veterans, conscientious objectors, whistleblowers in different countries, military rape survivors, and also with their families. And as we've seen in every one of these struggles, it's always the women, it's usually the women who are really doing the backbone of that justice work, and we try to bring out the work that the women do in these campaigns. So most recently we've been working to support Chelsea Manning, who is an Army whistleblower, people may know, released thousands of documents to WikiLeaks, was faced a court-martial this summer, is now facing 35 years in prison. In our work, we had two focuses. We wanted to bring out, to draw together the international support for Chelsea, because she really is an international figure. She's, in what she released, you know, she has the greatest support from around the world, and you know, had influenced the Arab Spring in Tunisia. The start of the Arab Spring had an influence on the pullout from Iraq by the U.S. government. I'll talk a little bit more about what she released, but so that really drawing together the international support for Chelsea was one focus. The other focus was working with our sisters in Queer Strike to challenge the mainstream LGBTQ movement, which would rather talk about how to get gays into the military than supporting a then brother, now sister, who's, you know, facing an incredible amount of time in prison. And throughout the campaigning, you know, over 3 years, while she was in prison, we've been really kind of drawing together the grassroots queer support for Bradley, now Chelsea. And part of that really came to a head this beginning in April. There was in San Francisco, and other people in San Francisco, you know, really part of this, so maybe can even speak more about it in the discussion, but Chelsea was nominated to be Grand Marshal of the SF Pride, which is a huge, you know, honor. And the current SF Pride president rescinded that nomination, seemingly single-handedly, possibly. We don't know how it happened, but she wrote a completely terrible statement saying they would never, you know, support something that would place our armed forces in danger. Really disgusting, you know, unbelievable thing. That unleashed a complete tidal wave of activism around this to get then Bradley Manning renominated as the Grand Marshal of SF Pride. There was protests all the time at the SF Pride meetings. They were forced to do town hall meetings. You know, hundreds of it broke loose the floodgates about all the ways in which SF Pride had been corporatized, and we're not dealing with real issues that lesbian and gay queer community was dealing with, the homeless youth, the care of the elders, all sorts of things. And also how the military recruiters were invited to be part for the first time of SF Pride this year, which is an ongoing fight. And so anyway, this coalition came together and had the largest contingent, non-corporate contingent at SF Pride this year, a huge you know, banner that stretched across the road, you know, where they were blocks long. So that really galvanized the movement there, and people don't know that story. I wanted to bring that out. So in this context, also wanted to bring out how then Bradley Manning was in prison over almost 10 months without charges, was in solitary confinement, in fact was tortured. He was forced to sleep naked. He had sleep deprivation. These kind of things were happening. So the international movement really is what it took to get him out of that. And in fact, we've heard that Juan Mendez, the special rapporteur on torture, first became interested in the issue of solitary confinement based upon investigating the situation with Bradley Manning. So he's definitely part of this movement we're talking about today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Eric. Okay, and our final speaker before we open up for discussion, I'm delighted to introduce Isabel Garcia. She's based right here in Tucson, Arizona. She is the co-chair of Derechos Humanos Coalición. She's been a long-time criminal defense attorney, and she has just been on the front lines of the whole struggle of the criminalization of migrants and immigrants. And we know Arizona is very much a frontline state, so we're delighted to have Isabel join us. Isabel.
so much for inviting me here, and I'm really honored to be with all of you, especially those who have talked today and the family members impacted. And I want to thank Margaret. We've never met. We've talked on the radio, and thank her really for inviting me to talk about, the criminalization of the migrant. And I love all the phrases that have been used throughout this conference. Prisoners of empire. I mean, we all are, and when you talk about immigrants, that's in fact what they are. Now, we have to talk about migration in terms of all of us here are very cognizant of the criminal justice system. That's where our family members are. We're dealing with prisoners. In the immigration arena, there's two areas. It almost doesn't make a difference to the immigrant, because if you're in a cage, you're in a cage. But you need to understand that there is an administrative proceeding, which most of the public falsely believes, well, that's where all immigrants are. They're just going to be deported. It's a civil administrative proceeding. What does that mean? You have no right to an attorney. And we all know if you don't have an attorney at that moment, I mean, some of them are really bad, like has been mentioned here, but you don't have an attorney, well, you don't know how to exercise your rights. You're an immigrant. You land in a detention center and you're facing formal deportation proceedings. They are civil in nature because after all, you're not going to face a prison term, and yet there's an Hondureña woman here in Eloy. She's been there for 4 years awaiting her deportation proceeding, and on and on. So we have to understand there's at least 30,000 beds at any given time that are filled. We have 1,600 here in the Eloy complex, just north here of Tucson. CCA's, Corrections Corporation of America, has made a lot of money, building prisons here. And so we have that aspect of it, right? And in a lot of ways, they're in the worst situation. You have absolutely, you're away from your family members. You have no one who is advocating for you at all, and they do what they want, as you can imagine. So that occurs all the time. And then there's suicides. Just 2 months ago, we had 2 suicides of 2 Guatemalans, and nothing has come out. We don't have any media, any journalism anymore. So, there's nothing that comes out about that. But then we also have to understand there is an actual criminalization of immigrants that most people don't realize. We charge, convict, and sentence to a private prison people whose crime is illegal entry or, heaven forbid, illegal reentry. That's a felony, 2 to 20 years in prison. And let me tell you, over half of the federal prosecutions last year, before it's all been our family members, black, brown, white, poor, for drugs, right? Because we hate drugs. Do we really hate drugs? 3 years ago, they let Wachovia Bank pay $111 million fine, a pittance, a fraction of their profits of 1 year. Wachovia Bank paid $111 million for what? For laundering $378.5 billion of the drug cartels. They weren't even named. Our kids are named and embarrassed and forever, demonized. You can't rent, you can't go to school, you can't get aid, on and on. They weren't even named. Are we against drugs? I mean, what a lie, right? I mean, what a lie. But, so, drugs are no longer the highest level of federal prosecutions. They are illegal entry and reentry. And boy, the prosecutors love it. Over 82,000 this past fiscal year, federal prosecutions and incarcerations were for illegal entry and reentry. Brown folks, short Indian men, every day you can see them. We have a process, some of you have heard me already talk about Operation Streamline, where we're streamlining the process. 1 hour, en masse, 70 men and women in chains, go through an entire criminal justice system and then are sent off. The other folks aren't as lucky. They get charged with a felony and are incarcerated 33 months, 54 months, 74 months for returning to this spot in the United States of America. And you have a record, and we have great technology so they can pull it up, that I was deported last year through Nogales. And now I'm coming back to join my family in Phoenix, and I'm arrested and I'm charged with a felony. And that's what's occurring every single day. And I say the prosecutors love it. Why? It's the easiest crime in the world to prove. And the defense attorneys have, all they go in there is to really get their check because they get paid $110 an hour. I mean, some of them I know and they're nice people, but there's no lawyering to be done. So of course the federal prosecutors love it. They love it. You have absolutely no defense to these cases, so you go into this kangaroo court, whether it's for the felonies or whether it's for the misdemeanors, and as a result, we have massive, massive incarceration. We also have, in the state of Arizona, we've criminalized. Just as we've learned from the black codes after post-slavery, how to demonize a particular group, we have created state criminal offenses. If you work as an immigrant, well, they charge you as an aggravated identity thief.
Oh my God.
And aggravated to boot, right? And that's the short title of your conviction. We have criminalized thousands in the state of Arizona since we created this crime. For what? For using false social security numbers. And to make sure to criminalize everybody, they even put in parentheses, even if it's a fictitious person, because a lot of people buy and they don't relate to anybody, yet they contribute, as of 2008, over $200 billion to our Social Security Suspense Fund. But anyway, we've criminalized them there. And the short title is aggravated identity thief, and we all hate identity thieves, right? So the other statute we have is we did impose a state smuggling statute. We already have federal smuggling statutes, but we imposed a state one. What do you think happened in Maricopa County? Because here they didn't really do it. They charged the load of people, this whole group of people, they find you in a safe house. When we created Phoenix as the smuggling capital, we funneled all the migrants through Arizona, so of course that was going to happen. You'd find a safe house. All of you would be charged with co-conspiracy to your own smuggling. What do you think your record is when it comes up? Smuggling. You will forever be barred. And we've criminalized thousands and thousands of these immigrants. And so here I'm a criminal defense attorney, so beyond the whole immigrant rights thing, you know, we've had a horrific time here in Arizona. Like many of your states, we have mandatory sentencing. We just witnessed one of the greatest atrocities here. Louis Gwen Taylor, half Mexicano, his mother is Gwen, and half black Taylor. He was arrested when I was his same age. We were 17, he was going to Pueblo High School. They arrested him for an arson in a hotel downtown that 28 lives were lost. You can see it on 60 Minutes. You should look up his case because it's an outrage. He was just released after 42 years in prison. My age, and he looks double my age and thin, and they just released him. And this Pima County Attorney's Office would not dismiss the charges in spite of the evidence that's overwhelming about the racism by the fire examiner. They can't even say it was an arson. I mean, it is absolutely flawed. And rather than dismissing charges, this Pima County attorney, to get his freedom finally, made him plead no contest. And so, you know, we are in this together. We in the immigrant rights circle, some of us, because there's a lot of immigrant rights work people that just say, oh yeah, just give us Senate Bill 744 and just give us a piece of paper. What good did it do to have citizenship for Oscar Grant, Carlos Lamadrid? What good does it have for all of us to have papers if we have a cop following us? Our basic right is to be free. We have to abolish prisons, and we have to stop the racial profiling. We have to stop this monster. And I know that this society is the opposite. If you're anti-crime, you get elected. And we are that dissent that really has to go forward to break all of that down. Because who cares about people behind bars? People don't even care about the homeless person next to them. So we have a big job to do, and we take it from the model of all of you and that prisoner strike. That is our model for our work in the future. So thank you so much.
What do you think about this panel? Wow. Not only letting us know what time it is, but also the resistance and the struggle and the possibility of winning.